My name is Peter Levin. I'm president of Bell Rock Media. We distribute mobile and broadband content and publish mobile and broadband content both here in the States and also in Japan. Probably the largest distributor of mobile and broadband content in Japan. Very quickly, want to introduce our panelists up here. We've got Lee Hancock, Chief Executive Officer and founder of GoTo. Lee is a veteran and pioneer in the location-based services industry, a catalyst in technological advancement. Lee's been developing GoTo's technological and patent efforts since 1995, and in 98, he co-founded In-Building Systems, a provider of high-speed internet access for multi-tenant office buildings, a business that was sold in the year 2000. To Lee's right, we have Nara, I'm going to get this right, Nara Rajagopalan. Close?
Close.
Okay, good, works for me. He's the Vice President of OpenWave's Mobile Edge Business Unit. Prior to joining OpenWave, Nara served as Vice President of Technology in the Chief Technology Office at Lucent. In his role, he was responsible for creating and executing Lucent's software strategy around management infrastructure and convergence. And to Nara's right, we have Shokut. What's that? Shokut. I told you I should have gone with shortcut and then I dropped the R and we would have been in good shape. Okay. Senior Vice President of Business Development at Rhythm New Media Incorporated. Shokut was most recently Chief Technology Officer at NeoCarta Ventures, a $300 million early stage investment firm. Prior to NeoCarta, Shokut pioneered the development of the instant messaging platform Yahoo Messenger, which was developed into one of the world's largest online communities. And to his right, we have Vince Shaw. Vince is Director of Deloitte Consulting, a director in Deloitte Consulting's Technology, Media, and Telecommunications practice. Vince has over 22 years of experience in the area of telecommunications and media revenue stream systems and operations, and is a leader in Deloitte's wireless telecommunications ordering and billing systems and practice. So back to the subject matter at hand. Mobile commerce and content, the mobile web, off-deck content, mobile search, and MVNO options. I mean, are you kidding me? So I'm going to rename this, Are We Drinking Our Own Kool-Aid? There's been a phenomenal amount of hype around the area of mobile advertising and where the advertisers and the marketers are spending their dollars. I think last week's benchmark deal of Google spending $900 million and actually could net out to be something closer to $1.5 billion of an ad spend on News Corp's MySpace set the bar very, very high. And there's a tremendous amount of marketing and advertising dollars that are flowing very aggressively into emerging platforms. And right now the focus surely seems to be in the broadband and online spaces respectively. So I'd like to kick off the discussion with our panel here on how we see the replication of that type of momentum in the mobile space and how we see those dollars allocated through some of the products that are currently being offered. Vince, I'm going to kick off a question to you and then the rest of the panel can run with it. Part of your expertise is in MVNO implementation. And as recently as today, Disney announced that they're pulling out of their MVNO efforts in the United Kingdom due to a highly competitive and volatile marketplace. So how do you see the MVNO landscape shaping up in the United States? Who are the winners? Who potentially are the losers? Who are the players? Who perseveres? And how does the model change?
Sure. First of all, I think you need to break the MVNO marketplace down into three major segments. First of all, you've got the folks that are predominantly focused on just reselling voice, folks like TracFone in its most pure example, to some degree Virgin, although that's more of a brand play, and then obviously Boost that's migrating more in what I'll describe in the second category in a second. But in that category, you've got basically some viable players, probably not a lot of room for very many more, unclear whether even the players that are there are going to be successful long-term on their own or whether they're more valuable as ultimately a source of relatively low-cost subscriber ads for another carrier that might ultimately merge with them. The second category would be folks that are really using the MVNO business model to start to get into the merger of media and telecommunications and to find a fundamentally new device. And I would categorize Disney Mobile in the US in that category, certainly mobile ESPN, and some of what Helio and others are doing as well in that category. And I'll come back to that in a second. Then the third category would be folks that really require an MVNO model because they have customized handsets or because they require some degree of control over the customer relationship that no other model gives them. I think to fundamentally answer the question, the real downside to the MVNO model is taking on a lot of characteristics of a traditional telecom carrier that a lot of these folks are really not equipped to handle and is pretty far outside of their core competency. But at the same time, what's happening is the evolution and creation of a fundamentally new product suite that's the merger of the mobile device and customized applications like what Disney is doing, applying which you would typically find is large corporate functionality around limit monitoring and account hierarchies to the family. That type of thing, I think, is got a permanent future. However, I doubt if we'll see very many more players undertake that under the umbrella of the MVNO model, where they take on the responsibility for actually all of the service and voice and handset sales to the consumer. I think we'll see a model that becomes much more of an intermediate model, somewhere between the licensed model that has been around for a long time, where we can all get ESPN or CNN or what have you licensed content over our devices, and on the other end of the spectrum, the complete MVNO. I think we'll see something in the middle of those emerge, which is really a best of both worlds.
And to the panel, I would throw out there, in terms of some of the speed bumps that the MVNOs are hitting of late, how do you see advertisers and marketers jumping on this platform, or do you see them migrating away from it in the current marketplace?
Our experience, we've seen that the advertisers, big brand advertisers, they look at numbers. And MVNOs, they essentially, right now, it's a kid's game. The biggest MVNO is for example, about 3 million people. That is nothing for brand advertisers. So the big advertising dollars, they're hardly touching the big carriers, your Sprint and Verizon and US and Orange and Vodafone's. Anything lower than that, the numbers are so small and minuscule, and their offerings are so convoluted right now. They don't even know what they're doing. And the advertisers are not looking at that seriously. They're playing with it for sure, but nothing substantial for MVNOs.
And Nara, what about your perspective on this?
So MVNOs fundamentally have a challenge, in our opinion, which is for a carrier, it is a little bit of, oh, I'm going to get market share away from someone else and towards me, but it fundamentally does not broaden the overall penetration of mobile phones too much. So, creation of a brand and then going in and selling it to teens and then creating a little teen-based ecosystem is certainly good, but if the teen already had a phone as Sprint, what did I get out of it? Because at the end of the day, 3 guys run the networks and all the MVNOs sell phones to, among that audience, so to speak. So to the extent that an MVNO is not able to penetrate an extra segment and go out and create a new marketplace, which is what Disney was able to do or attempted to do, for instance. Overall, the play itself, at a broader sense, we find it as uninteresting. But we of course sell to MVNOs as much as we do to the large carriers. But the way we are seeing the ecosystem emerge or play out today, so to speak, is certainly the large brands seem to be a much more attractive target for advertisers to go to, because clearly they have the numbers, and the MVNOs are not providing a compelling enough value proposition as of now, outside of perhaps Virgin in the US, for subscribers to migrate away and into a particular brand and stay there, thus creating that brand loyalty, and then the brand advertisers following them to that particular brand.
I could just echo the prior 2 panelists, or all 3, I guess. It's all about numbers to a certain extent, and the MVNOs just don't have the numbers. Amped, which I think they've publicly announced that their goal is to have 2 million subscribers at the end of the day, I think is their goal. Now, they may be able to make a lot of money with 2 million subscribers by selling video or content or whatever, but But my experience, and we've had quite a bit of experience selling advertising now in the mobile arena, is that they're not going to make much money off advertising with 2 million subscribers. It's just not enough. And that's where they hope to be eventually. Someone told me the other day, I won't repeat the number because I didn't read it myself, but I guess someone had reported how many subscribers they have today, and it's a small percentage of that 2 million. You had mobile ESPN, which their goal was to have 200,000 subscribers, I think, by the end of the first year. And, again, it's just not enough to get the attention of advertisers. Now, they did a great thing and got about $2 million worth of advertising commitments out of a bunch of advertisers about a year ago. We'd love to see that. But my gut tells me that the real reason why they got that was because of backfill and their ability to promise views on ESPN, the WAP version, so to speak. So they bundled it with a lot of other things. And if they didn't, I hope I don't offend anyone, but if they didn't, I'm sure there are a lot of sponsors that paid that $2 million that are pretty disappointed today because their numbers have not ramped up the way they were supposed to, apparently, is what I've read, and I think Iger's confirmed that. So anyway.
And
I think if they didn't hit those numbers, that there'd be make goods through the rest of the traditional media company that they could probably get paid out.
Right, yeah, that's how they did it. I mean, it's also, by the way, you see this in the online mobile space as well. The people that are having the easiest time of selling mobile advertising are those that have a very robust online product, and they're combining them. They're bundling, and it's been done for years. But you convince somebody that, hey, if you want to be online, you need to put 20% of your buy into mobile. Then they can allocate that revenue to the mobile side, so it doesn't look quite as difficult as it really is.
And in the mobile advertising, most of the stuff are what you talked about. Difference between sponsorship and real advertising is very big. What ESPN is getting essentially is, ESPN is a big brand. Their dollar comes essentially from television. And people are throwing this $2 million pot just to be associated with ESPN, nothing to do with mobile.
So along those lines, Shokun, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I just read that in June, your CEO at the Cannes Advertising Seminar, Cannes Festival for Advertising, your CEO spoke of the tremendous opportunities, but also the tremendous pitfalls that lay in the way of traditional marketing and advertising getting a foothold in North America. How do you see the industry currently responding to these pitfalls, in particular with respect to the current carrier landscape here in the U.S. versus that of Europe and Asia?
That's a loaded question. I didn't know you were doing research. The carriers and the advertisers, it's actually a very interesting story. If you have followed all the carriers, and I'm talking about most of the big carriers in the world, you pick up Vodafone, Sprint, Verizon, all those things. They're talking about becoming quote-unquote a media company. 2 years ago, Arun Sarin went on front page of Wall Street Journal, claimed that Vodafone is going to be a media company. Nothing has happened in 2 years. Same thing happened with Verizon and all those guys. Because the concept of becoming a media company has to do a lot with advertising, right? That's what media companies get money from. If you believe that hypothesis, then you have to think that the carriers are looking at what they quote-unquote non-subscriber revenue very seriously now. But they really don't know how to. So this is how they look at the world. They look at, if I'm looking at the advertising, where are the money spent? And can they attract a lot of those money into their network? So if you know the numbers, just for the people who wants to be amused, the worldwide advertising numbers are about $560 billion. Out of that, we spend here about 260 of them. So half of the worldwide advertising dollars spent in the world spent in this country. Now, of that thing, the big chunk actually, that is what I call easy money for the television and brand advertising. Television guys is the brand advertiser, about 80 billion of it. And that's what is these carriers are kind of get. The reason, very simple. Well, all those guys know the company Nielsen, you will know how that works. Nielsen works about, they sample the entire, they actually make prediction about entire audience of 270 million US population of 4,000 samples. Now that is statistics that any kid will say is deeply flawed, but that's how it works. That's a good thing, right? Because $80 billion is a lot of money. if that is the hypothesis of spending $80 billion on television, and I can keep some of it, same logic, there is a chance for the carriers to pull some of those things in, attract that brand advertiser in their network. And that's what I think ambition is. The pitfall becomes they really don't know how to do that, right? You need reach and frequency. The carrier think that they do know that, but they really don't know how to monetize that. So I don't want to say more than that, because there's a lot to do with what we do and what we kind of aspire to do. But I think the opportunity kind of lies in there, is how you solve these equations. The brand advertisers want stuff like your reach and frequency, if you can give them better, and if you can still keep the equation in a way that is they are willing to spend big dollars on your network, and the carriers can somewhere mend that. They're getting there. They're much better positioned today than they were about a year ago, but it's nowhere near done. Does that answer the question in a vague way?
Yeah, I would just add to that there we go. Sorry, I would just add to that I think what we're seeing is something that's happened in a number of other media spaces when there's been a transition from a mass market focus to much more of a niche focus. However, this time around, there are a lot of players that really don't have the expertise in managing that kind of a transition. And to your point about the Nielsen aspect of this, it's really going to require people that are successful really hitting the ultimate jackpot in advertising to have an ongoing kind of laboratory mentality, if you will, to understand what's going to work and what's not in the niche that they're focusing on. So if one focuses on some of the names that we talked about here for a second, like the sports fans associated with ESPN or various other niche audiences that would be logically associated with the services we've talked about. It's one thing to serve those audiences. That's difficult enough, as the MVNOs are finding out, but to really have appropriately targeted advertising that will ultimately translate into actual monetization. I think it's the same thing we've seen in the publishing area. You could even apply it to automotive areas, various other industries that have gone from a mass market to a niche focus. It's not a quick process. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's going to take a lot of learning, and I think anybody that says that they already have the answer is probably not really appreciating the level of research and audience evaluation that's going to have to go on. That'll probably be the differentiating criteria between the folks that are successful, ultimately reaching a valuable marketplace, and those that aren't.
And if I may add one thing to it, you may actually hear a lot of advertisers, you heard in the previous panel also, they are saying, we really want to do mobile, right? And we are saying differently, and you're wondering who is right. We're both right. There are a lot of advertisers who are interested in doing stuff in mobile, right? The question is how much they want to spend. That boils down to CPM, right? CPM needs what he was talking about. It needs some way of proving that you have those reach and frequency, you have those things that brand advertisers like, for example, brand recall, aided brand recall, all those stuff that television and internet stuff has been proved. That does not exist. So advertisers want to spend, they just don't know how much.
No, go ahead.
So the point I wanted to make was if you took the MVNO case, what is the intention of creating an MVNO and why will it succeed, or what is it by the carrier? There are two aspects to it, right? One is certainly using the brand name, the marketing power of the MVNO in order to reach a wider audience. So it takes away your upfront cost and gives it to someone else. But if you take the flip side of it, it also lets you target your advertisements in some way if you were able to do it right? In other words, if I were an advertiser and MVNOs are really very successful, I could go to Virgin and I could be guaranteed that I'm going to get to 60% of the teens by pushing this ad out. That's an excellent value proposition if you were able to do that in a successful way. Now, there's certainly an ecosystem to be created if the carrier themselves could take their audience and divvy it up into interesting things for advertisers, right? In other words, if I could go to Sprint as an advertiser and tell, I'm not interested in just broadcasting this ad to every one of your subscribers, but this is a demographic, 13 to 19-year-old going to a Britney Spears site, I would like to target this kind of ad. That becomes a more interesting value proposition because now you're able to target better, and smaller numbers would still be okay because the relevance of the ad is much higher than otherwise, right? So there's certainly an ecosystem waiting to be created where the larger carriers are able to slice and dice their subscriber base into smaller, interesting niches, and that would certainly drive the advertising ecosystem to come in and do more targeted advertising. And funnily enough, broadcast medium is very poor for advertising in targeted sense. That's why Nielsen's of the world exists, where they say, hey, TBS, 9 to 12, these are the kind of audiences that watch this program, and let's go get these kind of advertisers to go to that segment. But in the mobile world, you exactly know who your audience is on a per user basis, what their likes and dislikes are, and you must be able to target your advertisements in a much higher success rate, which would hopefully kick off this advertising market space in a much more rapid way than what it is today.
Here's the point, counterpoint. I agree that segmentation is good, and segmentation will help you sell at a higher CPM. But as you segment the market, your inventory goes down substantially. And so you have this catch-22. We delivered last year about 50 million mobile ad impressions across all carriers. We're a local directory, and so we have I only mention that only because we have a base to look at, okay? And many of those were paid for. All right, and we had CPMs ranging all the way from $50, which was great, that made me very happy, to an effective CPM on some CPA campaigns, which are performance-based, in the 50 cent to $1 CPM range, which didn't make me happy. And interestingly enough, the advertisers want the segmentation, and they're willing to pay a little bit more for it, but not enough more that it's worth going out after them, because right now everybody's doing R&D in advertising. I mean, with very few exceptions, almost everyone's doing R&D. So they'll put 50 to 200,000 into a budget, and they're testing it. They're going to see how it works, and they'll pay $50 CPM maybe if there's a lot of demand and not a lot of supply in that given month. But they're also not ready to spend $1 million. And even if they were, if you segment the market down, no one has the inventory to give it to them. Now, the carriers might eventually. So that's one thing you just got to worry about, is that if you segment too much, you don't have the inventory. The second thing I'd say is that the carriers, they're just beginning to learn about advertising. They're so much in their infancy. And they have some misconceptions about what will work and what won't. I don't think any of the carriers have advertising salespeople yet knocking on doors. They have people that they're trying to partner with that are selling them a variety of stories, but they really don't know yet. And it'll be really interesting to see if companies that have their entire life existed on a user pay model can effectively shift to the point where 10, 20, or 30, 40% of their revenues are off advertising. Then the final point I want to make is you're never going to sell advertising unless you have great, outstanding, compelling content. I mean, people don't come to a phone to watch ads. They come to a phone to use it as a service, as a tool. Hopefully now in digital, they're coming to see content and getting excited about it. Maybe they'll put up with ads to see that content. Our surveys would tell us that they will, that most users would rather get free content and see an ad than pay for the content. It's about 80-20, by the way.
Exactly.
We've polled thousands of mobile users. Exactly. But in any event, the other thing the carriers really need to work on is really building out that content. I mean, you see some that are focused on it, like Amped, and then some of the big guys have really tried, but I think there's a long way to go in putting together really compelling content for the end users.
So, Lee, I'm going to take you to task here just to keep it interesting. This week, Adweek released a stat that took a poll in North America, and it was 1% of consumers would choose a service provider based on entertainment services. The remaining 98 would base that decision on coverage and pricing. And I think that speaks to a couple of your points, but it also runs a bit contrarian.
You know what? I don't disagree at all. I had a big debate with the big carriers in a small group one time. There were a couple of them and me on a different panel, and I told them that we have service level agreements, and everybody talks about 5 nines. And the truth is that half the carriers, they're probably lucky if they get 1 9. I mean, the service just isn't that good on voice, and you get lost calls, whatever. And when's the last time you talked to someone who said, I use carrier X and they're unbelievable. I love them. They're great. I never get drop calls. So I'm actually a big advocate that the carriers ought to focus more on that that piece of the business. But having said that, there's a lot of cool stuff in content. What we do is more utilitarian. It's where am I, what's close to me, how do I get there, and that sort of thing. We're not really a lot of, about showing video and all that. And some of that, there's a continuum between pure utilitarian voice, data that's utilitarian, and then data that's media. But clearly the carriers, they've still got a lot of room for improvement on quality of basic services.
I think, folks, you're noticing everyone up here is kind of pussyfooting around criticizing the carriers, because in some way, shape, or form, we all rely upon them to one degree or another. So we're holding back a bit. But I think at the end of the day, these types of discussions, hopefully will lead to the kinds of progress that we're referencing. And maybe for the benefit of the folks out here, if you guys could walk them through a dollar spent. Here's a marketer, they're going to spend $1, on one of these platforms. How does it break down?
Wow, that's a very difficult question. It actually depends on, it's a very difficult question. The reason is many of those discussions, it's just happening, believe it or not. It's very early on. But if you look at it, I'll give you anecdotals because I don't have a right answer. The carriers historically had the attitude of, I own everything. If there is $1, I want 80 cents of it. Actually, if you talk to our good friends here, the big ones, Sprint and Verizon, they will say, I keep 90 of it, you keep 10. That doesn't work because there is not enough value in 10% for anybody to produce content, advertisers, anyway, it doesn't work. On the flip side of it, if you have talked to some of the good content providers, like music guys, is Tom here in this? I don't know, so I can bash him. The music guys did the same thing. They said, I want 80% of anything you do. So they were broken on that. Now, good thing here is, now they understand, at least the carriers on, not on paper, but on talking to them, they understand that there are 3 big partners in this ecosystem that you need to play with and respect and share it. Not probably equally, but cannot kind of do it too wrong to others. There are your content providers. If you look at video, there are people who are producing the videos, the owners of the videos, not the aggregators themselves, because they are carrying the cost and doing stuff, and whoever is making this thing together, the aggregators. These 3 people are essential to provide a service. And in my ideal world, I think it's like equal split, but I think it's most likely 50% goes to carrier.
I've got to tell one anecdotal story that's very relevant. We were around in '99. We launched, and our original model was we were going to be partners with the carriers and pay them to be on their deck. AOL paid $10 million for 1 year on the top of the Sprint deck. Interestingly enough, we didn't pay anything because we were small and had a really, really compelling app that they wanted on the top of the deck. But within a year, we went to a model where we paid them a piece of our revenues. Then the dot-com crash happened, and we hit a wall, and we couldn't continue to pay them anything. And we called them up and we said, we're closing our doors. And they said, please, please don't close your doors. You drive a lot of traffic. This is a great service on the phone. So we went in and amended our contract. And what's interesting about that, we had about a 40-page contract, and we made one change in the entire contract. Instead of us paying the carriers for placement, they paid us for development and continued operation of our service. Now what that demonstrates is just how young a market can be when the only thing, when you enter into a contract and negotiate it, you change it a year later, and the only thing you change is who pays whom. The truth is there's a lot of value that goes both ways. I needed their eyeballs. They needed my product and my service. And at one point, no one really knew where the value was. So I mention that just because it demonstrates so starkly the fledgling nature of this market. Today, it's really the same thing, maybe not quite as extreme. But the carriers want to make money, but they also know that some guys have really, really good content that they have to have. And so those people are going to negotiate different splits. And the carriers also know, by the way, that if they don't provide enough money for the content providers, then the content providers aren't going to develop any more content, and the whole thing's going to fall in on itself. So, it's wild, wild west out there. I would say that most people believe at the end of the day, the carriers are going to get paid a portion of the advertising, just like they get paid a portion of digital content that's sold. But I'll also tell you that the more valuable these services become and the harder they are to deliver, if a carrier takes 40% off the top, and without the carrier take, you've only got a product that has a 30% gross margin, then that business is never going to go anywhere because it's a losing business. And the carriers have to realize eventually they can't take 40% off of services that don't have phenomenal profit margins. And they're a little bit spoiled because the services they've been selling so far have phenomenal profit margins. They're digital content. You know, the marginal cost of delivering an extra Madonna ringtone is about 0.03% of the product. Of course, Madonna wants 90%. You can figure that into the cost. But you have to look at that. And the carriers are going to have to realize at some point, if they want products that are really rich and really valuable and really compelling to end users, they're going to have to make sure that the content providers have enough money in the pot to build the product, make a profit, and improve and enhance the product. And they're not doing, well, I won't say they're not doing that today. They're doing that today in very limited cases.
I want to ask the panel as well. Recently down in Los Angeles, we had one of the carriers come down in the last year and sit down a lot of folks from the media industry, you know, marketers, advertisers, and content producers. And it was for a video service for a phone. It happened to be 2 levels down at a very large hotel in Los Angeles. And so the demonstration, needless to say, went nowhere. And you know, I had a very large marketer sitting next to me, and I won't use their name, but the comment as he got up and left was, it's not ready for us to say, oh, look at this not so great experience brought to you by. And so in terms of benchmarks in the near future timeline, you know, what do you guys see happening domestically within the carrier landscape for us to play a little bit of catch up? You know, we read about today Sprint accelerating their timeline somewhat, but you guys are in the tent, if you will, so maybe you could impart some of that knowledge to us.
I'll take a cut at it here. First of all, the carriers have to do a couple things. They need to get real about exactly the point that you're making. And quite frankly, there have been a number of products that required what I'll call very high quality transmission, very high reliability, that basically got shelved because the network won't support it. And there's been, I would say, we've seen it behind closed doors, a degree of denial where both carriers and equipment manufacturers just think that everything's wonderful and that a dropped call now and then is just a minor annoyance. But that's not at all the way the broader user community feels. I guess the fundamental point that I would make about all this is when you're looking at the carriers, something that they've been historically very bad at is understanding the psychology of how their customer base makes buying decisions. So anything in this whole ecosystem that relies on their ability to do that is probably not going to be too successful. However, that opens an opportunity for others that can supply that type of analytical capability and that type of understanding. The carriers, for a long period of time, would come to us and say, wait a minute here, I don't understand why my churn is so bad, why I'm losing customers, but my customer satisfaction is very high. And the answer is customer satisfaction is reported in their surveys as an extremely poor indicator of people's buying patterns. So it was just a completely fallacious idea in the first place to be looking at that type of thing. You can expand that type of insight out across the exact topics that we've been talking about here. So I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I know that they have a huge degree of catch-up if they're really going to understand their customer base the way, say, other industries that can predict with incredible accuracy people's behavior. Take lowly direct mail. I would say that they're far ahead of the carriers in their ability to predict response rates in comparison to the way the carriers can predict whether somebody's going to continue with their service or buy a particular service. So I think it's both a weakness to be understood, but also an opportunity for somebody to step in and really help to shore up that area.
Look, I have an interesting thing for the audience. How many of you think Europe is ahead of US when it comes to 3G and video and stuff? Raise your hand. Most of the people. The fact is, Europe is about 2 years behind US. Shocked, isn't it? The US actually have done their e-video and their video stuff recently in the last 2 years in a massive scale. I'm in Europe pretty much every other week. Their video service sucks. That's the fact of it. Their 3G service is really in nascent state compared to here. If people have using like the Verizon store, if you're going there, you actually will see a lot of e-video phones. Most of the new phones come up as e-video. And Verizon, I think, has publicly said that about 90% of their network is going to be video, and they are staying to it. Sprint, very similar one. When they launched it in 60-something cities, worked flawlessly. The bandwidth in the back end is really good. So the same example he used, I would say if you are to do that, the same thing today, your experience is going to be massively different depending on what network you have. Singular doesn't work. And where you are, but you will have a substantially better experience than Europe, which is interesting to me at least.
Actually, the fact that US was behind helped US in getting ahead faster. So bizarrely enough, HSDPA as a technology, which is a natural evolution of the GSM world, in order to get to 3G, was a little behind the curve compared to EVDO, which
Way
is a natural
behind.
evolution of CDMA network. So all the CDMA guys are out there deploying. So clearly, US is way ahead of the curve in terms of rolling out high-speed networks. Verizon and Sprint have it launched over 200 markets today, and Singular is struggling. I think they're launching the 20th market perhaps by end of this month. So a little bit of lag there behind, primarily because of technology availability, but certainly we predict that, because of the other thing that is happening in the communication world, which is not media oriented, but is more communication oriented, which is what 99% of us are using our cell phones for currently, which is, IMS. They're making a huge push and investment in making that as a better communication device, and that is actually driving so much investment that the medium for delivering better content, better media is going to be there in a year and a half in a reasonably well penetrated fashion, because the IMS spend is so much and the networks are rolling out faster than what others predicted. So we believe that in a year and a half, we should have a good population of people out there with high-speed networks and high-speed phones, so that your media experience on the phone is going to be much more compelling than it is now.
We're a low bandwidth application and don't really require a lot of bandwidth, so it may not be applicable. But I've said for many years there's 4 key pillars, and that's ease of use, ease of access, accurate information. We do deliver, directory type information, and then ultimately compelling information. But I've also said that those 4 pillars have to rest on the ground, and the ground is a system that works flawlessly. And so I think that there's still room for improvement. And quite frankly, given the state of affairs and the state of installed base, I'm glad I'm not into high bandwidth, because there's a lot of issues when you try to roll over even a basic WAP user into video content in high bandwidth applications. And I love it because my services that back in '99 were relatively slow are now working much faster, and they are pretty compelling speed-wise. But it worries me in terms of how fast you're going to be able to get to the masses, maybe let's say 50% of the phone users with high bandwidth video applications. I think it's going to take a while, and I'd be watching that very carefully.
So let's take that a little further, because it speaks to one of the multiple items on my very eclectic and schizophrenic panel title here. In terms of some of the new applications, Lee, that you see coming around the bend, right? You guys are a service provider. Your application is relatively rudimentary, and I mean that in the kindest sense of the word. What kind of stuff do you guys see working here domestically?
Well, we are seeing a lot of uptick from advertisers. I mean, I don't want to paint too bleak a picture there. We were selling advertising today, and we see a lot of demand. And interesting enough, the lowest hanging fruit are the guys that they're the American Expresses of the world. They want to be everywhere. They'll buy $100,000 at a $20 to $40 CPM, maybe higher if it's a really high demand month and not much inventory. So we're all about getting that basic information out there. And again, we're a directory, but we are expanding into different types of content, and you're going to see more accurate information. For example, today we're all about yellow pages and movie times and things like that. You'll see more information about events, concerts, sporting events, and no one delivers that now, interestingly enough. It is very, very hard to deliver. Even online, it's pretty hard to get that real-time information. So we're expanding that way. We'll probably be expanding into some, what I would call soft content, because you still see a lot of demand for things like jokes of the day and horoscopes and all that kind of stuff. And interestingly enough, we've built a monetization engine around any kind of content where we know we can make X cents per page view. So it's easy now to go buy half X cents per page view, buy content, and increase that. But for us, it's very basic. And I think in terms of the future, maybe pass the mic down to the guys that are looking more for that more robust environment. But I will say this, there's still a long way to go with basic content. Information, images, textual information. There's still, I think, plenty of demand for that today and room for growth.
Guys,
Yeah.
maybe we could speak to this because off-deck content. I mean, this is an area where marketers and advertisers have a keen interest. It is a way for them to tell their message under their terms. How do you guys see that market growing in the near term?
It's actually, for the carriers, this is a hot topic right now. I think if you have a good solution and you can talk to the carriers about how you're going to monetize that off-deck traffic, you will get a meeting tomorrow. But the problem there is, A is off-deck and on-deck. Right now the traffic, and probably you can add more, it's about a 90-10 split. Most of the stuff comes from on-deck stuff, and off-deck is really small still. Because of this close, walled garden thing, which I personally don't see going away because there is no reason to. So off-deck stuff that are, the advertisers that are trying to get to the off-deck stuff and offerings is things that really doesn't work for the carriers. Now you're thinking, what does that mean? Give you an example of it. A video is actually a bad thing for the carriers because it is expensive. If they don't make it, they don't make money out of it, they want to shut it down because more you stream on their network, more they lose. They don't want that to happen. Try that on Verizon network, it won't work. So off-deck stuff is actually interesting to them, to the carriers at least. But now they have categorized what kind of stuff they want. And I would actually come back to your comment. I would say off-deck stuff that I have seen, my limited experiences, they're looking at textual contents. They're looking at stuff that are out there, that web-based, but not very rich content. Like I said, videos and audios and stuff like that. The carriers are actually taking a strong stance against it. That said, I'm not going to let stream if it's not coming from my on-deck network.
So actually, our experience with carriers, and we talked to quite a few, has been slightly different from that. What we see today is about 40% of WAP, internet HTTP traffic actually goes off deck, right?
Which network?
Uniformly across the world. In fact, it's higher in Asia compared to America. America is around 40%, Europe is around 45%, and perhaps a little higher, 50 to 55, if not 60 in Asia and Latin America. So a lot of WAP content actually is being consumed increasingly off deck. That is what the reality is. That is what the reality is. The carriers are grappling with the fact, what do we do going forward now that the content is clearly going off deck? So it is not hurting as much today because it is WAP, arguably much lower bandwidth compared to video. But there is increasing pressure on carriers today for, when we talk to carriers, they ask things like, can we launch a YouTube on mobile kind of service because another, MVNO has launched that, and we see potential for that. And what are the copyright issues in terms of my being able to layer an ad in front of someone else's content, and is that legal? So all of these questions are being actively asked. So they are certainly realizing the fact that off-deck content at the end of the day is going to be more compelling for you as an end user because you're used to the broadband usage pattern and you're used to finding content your own way instead of being limited to what's on deck. And now the struggle for them is not to stop it because they know that stopping is going to just make T-Mobile more powerful because they're going to open the pipes up and everyone's going to move to T-Mobile and go to the internet for free, right? So that isn't the answer for them. For them, the answer lies in how do I monetize the trend that is inevitable, where people are going to depend on content off deck increasingly going forward? How do I control that? How to monetize that? How do I make that experience more pleasant and differentiatable, where I can add value? Your viewing an off-deck content over my network is going to be different from your viewing it over another carrier's network. That's where a lot of focus that we see going inside the carrier's network today. And certainly, we try to play a part in that, and there are several others who are looking at this very, from a vendor perspective, who are looking at the space as well, and certainly there is a burgeoning market in that place.
still very early in the market, and one of the questions that comes up is why go off deck if you can be on deck? And I guess there's first thing is it's hard to get on deck. The second thing is you've got content that will allow you to never be on deck, and the carriers are very concerned about that. But the problem that you've got if you go off deck, again, is how do you get the users? You know, if you're off deck and you've got 200,000 or 300,000 users, now if you can get people to pay for that service, maybe that's fine. But if you're using a traditional internet model where the content's free and you try to monetize it through advertising, that's going to be tough. You might be able to do it through paid search. You know, that's the way the
Right.
traditional online internet's doing extremely well. In fact, I would argue that paid search has funded the entire return of the online internet because you've got millions of sites out there now, and really the only way they make money is because they're throwing up paid search ads. Good or bad, they're putting them up and they get clicked on.
60% of the market is derivative.
Is that right? I mean, it's just an enormous number. But you're going to see paid search in a mobile environment, and it's probably good. But still, and you may see the search engines in mobile wind up look just like they do now in online, where if you've got a off-deck mobile content site, you're going to pay 35 cents or $1 a click to get somebody to visit your site. Hopefully they bookmark it and it comes back. But it all boils down, if you're going to go off deck, you got to figure out how do you get critical mass, how do you get enough users soon enough to make money either in some way, either selling users or advertising or paid search. It's not going to be easy. We're fortunate, we've been around a long time, we've got a good on-deck presence. We have on-deck, off-deck as well, but I'll tell you, it's interesting. We have the right with our off-deck site to be very different than our on-deck site. We could run advertising for alcohol and God only knows what else if we wanted to, but we don't. We voluntarily, it's not even in the agreements, we voluntarily make our off-deck site work the same on Sprint, whether it's an off-deck hit or an on-deck hit, because we want to continue to be a great partner with Sprint. And that's a decision that you have to make. It's a decision we made. And interestingly enough, the lines get very, very fuzzy too, off-deck and on-deck, okay? I mean, it really gets to be a bizarre thing if you play it all out. I think at the end of the day, the carriers are going to be very important because they control the eyeball, and that's what it's all about if you're going to make money off advertising or if you're going to make money off selling to end users.
I think the argument from the marketers and advertisers' perspective is, if I'm P&G or Unilever, my statement would be, well, why do these folks at Verizon or Singular, why do they think they're better marketers than I am? I could end up being subordinated on their deck. I could end up being on a tier that's beneath a brand that is less than tertiary.
And they're absolutely right. But the point is, if P&G decides to go advertise on ABC, NBC, or CBS, they have restrictions and guidelines that they have to follow. And until someone goes out, I mean, there's how many cable channels are there today? Thousands. But yet, where are the advertisers still paying the most money for advertising? And it's on the major networks, even though the viewership percentages are down, et cetera. They still clamor, and they have an upfront season, and they buy this inventory, and they pay ridiculous prices for it in a bidding war. And that's just all supply and demand. You know what I'm saying? So my point is that advertisers have to realize that if they're going to advertise, they have to play by the rules of the guys that have the eyeballs, and that's going to be the carriers for a long time.
An interesting number. The new number came out of top advertisers, which used to be P&G used to be the top and stuff like that. Guess who is number 1, 2 this year? Sprint and Verizon. The things have changed. They're spending each like $1.5 billion. So massive advertising dollar. So when P&G talks to them and they say we want to do this, Verizon actually take the stances. No, actually we are bigger than you in advertising spend. So they also have a lot of push what goes into that one. It's interesting dynamics.
Well, that speaks to some of the MVNO issues as well. If you're Helio and you raised $425 million in capital to get your company up and running, that's half of what Verizon spends annually in marketing.
Exactly.
So that's
Exactly.
a tough slog. Question for you guys, because you guys are bleeding edge respectively to your business, and Lee, don't answer with your own applications. I'll turn your mic off. Some of the cooler applications that you guys have seen in terms of marketers really embracing the platform. I don't know if any of you guys saw that Snakes on a Plane message that Samuel L. Jackson leaves on your phone. If you guys haven't, Yahoo it or Google it. Notice how I said both. But you should check it. It's phenomenal. It's very interactive. You go to a site online, you enter into, there's 5 or 6 questions that are asked, and then it calls someone's cell phone from your cell phone because you've entered in your own number. And Samuel L. Jackson leaves a personalized message about the film Snakes on a Plane. and it's phenomenal. And it took off like wildfire, and everyone's talking about it. It was non-intrusive. It was a lot of fun. So I just want to know from you guys, what are some of the cooler things you've seen?
So one thing we recently came to know about is something that Verizon did. They sold tickets to a concert. I think they sold, within they launched the ad campaign, within 2 or 3 hours, they sold the entire tickets out. And the way they did that, again, they did mobile messages to people, which led to a click that immediately led to a buy, right? They did that, enormous uptake, the entire concert hall was sold out in a few hours. So that, people are experimenting in monetizing completely different ways of monetizing. I mean, this is something that you wouldn't traditionally think of as advertising, selling tickets to a concert. But certainly, they're beginning to do things like that. And increasingly, we see the phone, the US has had a slightly slower adoption for e-wallets and using the phone as your wallet instead of just as a communication device. So that is certainly a trend that is increasingly becoming very viable because of technology now that is available that could just punch in codes. It's very bleeding edge in South Korea and in Japan, and certainly we see some of those coming down here and becoming real applications. It's still in very early trial stages today, but we believe that in a couple of years we should start seeing e-wallet-like applications getting launched in America.
Yeah. An example I would give, which is it's a complete opposite end of the spectrum from high tech, and I guess one of the things that I'd like to communicate is it's amazing how many killer applications are just fundamentally very low tech, or at least very far from the leading edge. One of the things, and this was actually written up in The Economist a few weeks ago with some interesting statistics, one of the things that's recently rolled out in some different places is an application that allows doctors' offices to set up a list where they automatically text message people to remind them of appointments that they have coming up. And the statistics around the economic savings from reduction in missed appointments is just amazing. But if you can create a platform that facilitates something like that, and then based on the characteristics that you're supporting, embed additional content, some of which may be what somebody would view as traditional advertising, or things that might even not be associated with advertising at all, but effectively have that effect. There's some very interesting things going on out there, and I like that particular one as an example that says you don't need incredibly fancy technology, you don't need anything that's bleeding edge, just some very basic cobbling together of the existing technology can have a really big impact and get in front of people in a way that's both non-intrusive but potentially very persuasive.
So your dental cleaning appointment brought to you by Crest, I get it. I like it.
That could be a logical extension of that.
Yeah.
The coolest applications. How many of you have used the navigation stuff that Sprint and Verizon launched? One. Check it out. This is fabulous stuff. I mean, I don't know how you like it. It's actually really cool. If you guys have ever strolled across in Europe, they actually have a very similar stuff. And in Europe, the cab drivers actually use that. It's a fabulous thing. They have a turn-by-turn, just like your GPS system in your car. Fabulous thing. I'm big fan of that.
Yeah, and actually a point I would make around that is I think a fundamental learning that we've seen in the MVNO space that really expands out to just a lot of different applications is the coolness and desirability of the applications that are out there far exceed the ability to market them to the right people who would really want them.
Yes.
So you look at mobile ESPN, everybody that has that service loves the service. The problem has not been the service itself, it's number one, explaining to people what the heck it is. Number two, getting past the contracts that that prevent people from switching from one service to another. And you can extend this to just an infinite number almost of applications. As Lee was kind of alluding to earlier, I think, and the on-deck, off-deck discussion is a good example of this. The folks that are generating a lot of these neat applications are relatively immature when it comes to marketing beyond a relatively few mass market type of forums. If you can't market via paid search or being on somebody's deck or something like this, then the creativity tends to tail off pretty quickly. But I think what we're seeing is the organizations that are ultimately going to be successful are the ones that can get down and do good old-fashioned marketing or some very creative forms of marketing outside of what we typically see to make people aware of what they have. Most folks, or a lot of folks, just assume, hey, I've got this great application, it'll catch on. But there's so many great applications competing for mind space that there has to be something beyond the application that gets it to take off.
And I think to your point, Vince, ESPN is actually a great example of true cross-platform exploitation, right? Because look at fantasy football. You can follow that in front of your television. You can follow that, when you go to work and you're sitting in front of your CPU, and you can certainly have a phenomenally embedded experience with your phone as well.
Yeah, and I actually want to highlight that for a second, because that the application that they have around real-time tracking of fantasy league performance is one of the most fundamentally distinctive things that was in that application. But it took them a long time to figure out that people weren't just going to figure that out on their own. They had to really feature it in their advertising. So it was several months into their ads before that even started to appear as a theme. And that's a learning across this space, which says you're fundamentally educating the customer about a new thing that didn't exist before, and the customer won't just naturally gravitate to figure it out. It has to be very well spelled out. And the absence of that can kill an otherwise great product.
My space is, again, very simplistic, and so I don't see a lot of these really cutting edge things, but we've seen a pretty interesting couponing app out there. It's actually downloadable. It's very impressive. And they've gotten some advertisers, but again, the difficulty is getting enough coupons to get enough users that can justify the advertisers doing it. And then we are seeing a lot more creativity in advertising. Most of the bigger movies now have games, and they're forcing the game developers to spend money on advertising. And it's interesting, movies aren't advertising much, but they force the game developers and the people that license their content to advertise. And they're doing some pretty neat stuff, images and different types of games. And I haven't seen the Snakes on a Plane. That sounds like a really compelling application.
It's far cooler than anything any of you guys reference.
Yeah, we'll have to try it. And the only thing I would say is, and I think Vince made a very, very good point. You've got to keep this really simple, and we're at the top 2% of the awareness of what's going on in mobile right now. The people in this room are maybe the top 2% of the top 2%, and the 180 or 200 million cell phone users out there, the installed base that sometimes the marketers like to speak to. The top 2% of the top 2% is not a very big number, and we have to come up with things that are easy for them to understand and use. And I don't think my own prediction is that it won't be something that's cutting edge in technology that's the killer app. It'll be something very basic. Maybe it's the navigation system that the carriers start promoting, because they're spending a lot of money on that, and it's unlikely that any one developer is going to be able to spend that much money.
Well, and I think there's examples in the online world, the MySpaces and the YouTube. For all intents and purposes, it's off-the-shelf stuff. Yeah. I want to, I don't mean to cut you off.
As I said, there's some chat. I tell you, there's some chat apps that are pretty neat right now, and everybody thinks, oh, that's real basic. But if you look at the numbers of what's happening, it's kind of social networking in a mobile environment. Very simple, very basic, but they're getting good numbers.
And I wouldn't allow Lee to speak to his own product, but they do have one of the more superlative viral applications out there, or services rather, for mobile phones. So I'll do your commercial for you. We do want to open this up a bit because we're kind of winding down. So wanted to see if there's any questions out there for any of our panelists. And if you wouldn't mind just telling us your name and where you're from.
From Any Street. Just curious about your perspective about mobile ESPN. I mean, despite sports fans and for fanatics in the U.S., you would think a service like that would just take off like wildfire, yet it doesn't seem to have gone very far.
Oh.
I
Well,
have some ideas if you don't want to go first, but you should go first.
Vince, this is you. Sorry, buddy.
yeah, that's
You're on
fine.
the spot.
Just so everybody knows that I led Deloitte's consulting services to mobile ESPN. I had responsibility for that client, and actually, everything that we were associated with worked out very well. As I said before, the application is kind of universally loved by everybody who sees it. However, that said, to your point, I'll make a few points. First of all, no matter how leading edge you are, there's no substitute for just good old-fashioned execution when it comes to understanding how your customers are going to make buying decisions and really understanding the competitive aspects of the telephony business. One of the things that, ESPN has publicly acknowledged is they really did not appreciate the level of competitive intensity that exists within the telecommunications space. They're used to a space where they have some beachfront property, so to speak, on the cable networks, and they can leverage that, and they do leverage it, and they're used to being in a position of control as opposed to a position where they have to fight and scrap for every customer. So that's point number one. Point number two, the degree to get any customer to switch services where you're bound by a contract for your wireless service, and even more so to switch beyond the I hate to use the word, but there's no other one in my head right now, kind of the ecosystem of your particular device, and reassociate your basic voice and a little bit of data service to be purchased the way you would buy entertainment services. That's a big shift, and that requires a lot of education for the customer, on top of which ESPN has been very successful by basically just filling up every channel they can possibly find. So they got the magazine, radio, WAP traffic, on and on and on and on. However, that created a lot of confusion in the customer's mind, in the sense that they weren't sure, well, how is this different from what I can get already over WAP-like applications? How is this different from the EVDO, which Verizon very cleverly featured ESPN in their advertising for? So you've got kind of a pent-up degree of confusion on the customer's part, as much as a pent-up degree of demand. So I could go on and on and on, but I guess the last thing that I'll say, and be quiet about it, is when you look at, I guess I would say, everybody that's looking at the new media space really owes the various players, mobile ESPN, I think most clearly, but also Disney Mobile and some others, a degree of gratitude, because what they are doing is from within a set of expectations that is really heavily defined by Wall Street's quarter-to-quarter performance. They're starting up effectively a laboratory of new services where nobody really knows what's going to fundamentally take off, and that's going to require a degree, as I said before, of continuing experimentation and understanding of how customers' buying patterns are changing, that just requires a lot of new expertise. So it's much simpler than it's much more complicated than many have made it out to be. But I think that they'll ultimately be successful within their own definition of success, simply because of the degree to which they can put force behind it, and they're committed to it, and they'll be persistent about it.
Any additional questions?
I can get one quick comment on that. I'll make a bold prediction. ESPN Mobile will fail in the next 6 months to a year. They'll probably shut it down. ESPN WAP and maybe a downloadable version will continue to be one of the most trafficked spots in the mobile web, and will continue to be a very strong player and drive millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of revenue to Disney and their team. I just think it's so hard to create that in a separate phone dedicated to such a narrow niche. But anyway.
Back there.
Just a quick question regarding inventory. When you talk to the carriers, and maybe this is more the rhythm world, are they the ones defining the inventory, or is it the content guys? Because when you look at the cable model, inventory you clearly know who to talk to. When you go online, Yahoo, the content guy, or those people define inventory. So in the carrier world, who's the decision maker on inventory sale?
Depends on which carrier you're talking to. This is actually the core of the tussle, I would say. In advertising world, for those of you who are familiar with the term, what Peg is talking about is inventory. Whoever owns the inventory gets a bigger chunk, and the debate here is, if the carrier is essentially selling an advertising on somebody else's content, which they don't necessarily own, who owns that inventory? Is it the content owners or the carriers? Now, I would say in US, most of the carriers have taken the stance that this is their inventory. Same thing is, I would say, in UK. UK is very much the carriers own the inventory. Now, do the content providers like that? Absolutely, they don't. ESPN don't want to say my page on your on-deck portal is actually, Sprint's inventory. But that's how it's being played right now, at least in US. They so far have been succeeding. Europe is pretty open, other than UK. The tussle is going on. There are some cases the content providers are only winning, and some cases the carriers are winning. In the long run, though, I think it is going to be, it's our point of view, so I have no way of proving that. Our point of view is the carriers will claim that inventory, and they will share that revenue back to the content providers, because the other way around really doesn't work for them.
The ownership is a complex term, and I think there's a bundle of rights there, and I think it's co-owned, if you will. I mean, if the carriers are going to advertise on their own decks, by the way, okay, they're going to start putting ads at the top of their own decks, where their menu structured down 2 or 3 tiers, and they clearly own that. They clearly control that 100%. But when it's on my WAP site, okay, we own it. We're gonna be responsible for ad serving. We're gonna be responsible for selling it. We're gonna be responsible for accounting, customer service, etc. We're gonna have to follow a lot of guidelines that the carriers provide. So that's a little chink in the armor of our ownership, if you will. We're gonna have to keep the carriers happy, and we probably are gonna have to revenue share with them. I think that's fairly obvious to most people. But I don't think it's really black and white. They own it, we own it. It's going to be a very cooperative effort, and and even to a certain extent, I believe personally, even in an off-deck portal, you still run the chance that the carriers may have some little controls there, or else they might block your site. So we'll see how that all plays out. But it's very early stage, and no one really knows yet. The carriers, however, do expect. They may own the land, and you may be able to build the building, but you're going to pay your rent on the land, let me tell you.
Right, and it's happening today, right? I mean, Google's and Yahoo's are out there doing deals with carriers saying, hey, put my search at the top of your deck, and I will rev share. In fact, there's a huge argument going on right now about how much they're willing to rev share back to the carriers and how much the carriers want. So clearly, carriers believe that they have far more value in the food chain, if you may, than what they're getting out of Google and Yahoo today, and a lot of them are blocking them out because of that. But then there is the other way around as well, where you go to the carrier. Sprint is launching a mobile advertising trial soon, and it's all about them being the ad aggregator, where you would buy the inventory directly from Sprint themselves. So both cases are happening, and we just have to wait and see how the thing ends up evolving over a period of time.
And it also actually depends on the medium. That's very true. That is the gray. In video, it's obviously very different, because video, the cost for the network is astronomical, and there's no way they're compromising on that one. It is their inventory. They are going to play a very dominant role on that one, and there is no argument.
All right, let's. Anyone else? Any questions out there?
This is in the future, but what do you think is going to happen to the whole mobile ecosystem when we have Wi-Fi phones and nothing but wireless technology, and all of a sudden you can basically usurp wireless technology? I know that's probably 5-10 years out, but
It's not that far out.
I'm just saying it's going to happen. So how will that impact these conversations we're having with wireless carriers at that wall, and also networks will be much more open?
The carriers is actually worried about it.
Okay.
They are.
Yeah.
The
Sorry.
walled garden is made more than what it actually is. It's not that walled anymore. I don't know if you guys know. If you have a DO phone, you can pick up the browser, go to any site you want. Videos don't work. That is more to do with technology problems than it is with their restricting you from wanting to go to other places. But a lot of technology is just broken inside the network, and it'll take them a while to fix it, and that is why it doesn't work. But most carriers, at least in the US, don't restrict you from going anywhere.
Verizon does.
They don't encourage you to go. They make it hard to get to. They don't make the experience really pleasant, but you can certainly go.
Verizon, you can't. They block that. They drop the packets. And if you guys wondering why they do that, it's actually a thing that they hide behind. All the carriers do in US. FCC has a rule, has a mandate on the carriers. They will keep the airwaves. This is the word from FCC, clean, and they can essentially say we are unsure it's clean, and they can drop any packets. Try it. Try sending ringtones to other that is not on deck to Verizon subscribers. You won't get there. They drop it. There's packets in everything. It depends on the carrier to carrier. Video, we're much stricter.
Yeah, I would just add one quick comment, which is if you look at major change, it almost always happens in large waves. And those waves can be triggered by any number of things, but anything that requires a telephony set of underpinnings, when there's a major network shift over, that's usually a pretty good indication that a wave of handset repurchase will occur and various other things that will enable kind of marketplace uptick for a lot of things that might have had nothing to do with the underlying wave to begin with. But I think WiMAX and the things that provide some degree of similar type of communications interface will be one of those next big waves. So to the point earlier about us versus Europe versus Asia, I think it's incorrect to ever say that one part of the world is always or ever really better than another. It's that there are replacement waves, and each time one of those waves occurs, it's natural for whoever's doing the replacing to jump to the front of the pack. Why would you do anything that's parity or less?
Yep.
So when you're looking at product planning, I think you always have to say, what wave am I riding? You may not want to be controlled by it, but the reality is it's very difficult to have a major success outside of a wave, and you can often ride a wave to a degree that wouldn't be possible if you didn't really align your product offering with whatever that is. So I think it's going to have a huge impact. It's just kind of unpredictable what it'll be right now.
Anyone else? I think the last one, because we're going to wrap this up.
Why do you guys think that brands will dominate in this space over the next 4 to 5 years? If you flip this equation and look at it from an end user perspective, why am I interested in having ESPN phone or a Disney phone? Right? I want all the experiences that I can get on any phone I carry. Right? So why should I be limited? Going back to this MVNO discussion a little bit. I think there's a large strategy in terms of brands coming into market expecting user uptake to be substantially higher than what they think they can get. I mean, if I'm a user, which I am a power user, I have 4 or 5 things that I go to, and I don't need ESPN Mobile to do that. Right? I have a corporate label phone, which is what the market most of the times happens to be for high-end user services. Doesn't add up.
Yeah, I would simply say, first of all, I don't think at all that that brand will drive these services. I basically agree with you. I think brand has been completely overplayed. I mean, if brand loyalty would drive a service, there'd be a Harley Davidson phone out there, and maybe somebody's planning it, or a John Deere phone. But I think that the idea that folks can just extend a brand right into media and telephony services are completely mistaken, and there are a whole culture of people that do brand strategy, and I'm not really one of those people, but I know those people, and it's kind of a very sophisticated art and science in itself. But they would, I think, very much say you can destroy a brand very quickly by extending it into places it doesn't belong, and I think we may be seeing some examples of that. I don't know that ESPN and Disney are one of them, but I would say they certainly show the limitations of pure brand power. It's just completely incorrect to say that you can just take a brand and extend it into this space and expect to be successful solely on that basis.
I mean, mobile telephony by itself is a pretty complex operation. Just delivering voice is a pretty complex operation. It costs a lot of money in terms of spectrum and resources and core networks and things of that sort. So it's very hard to see even content providers for that matter, or even advertisers for that matter, demanding bigger share of the pie when the operators, and I'm not an operator, but demanding a bigger share of the pie when the operators are not out to spend a ton of money getting basic network coverage and something like that.
Right. Again, the broadband usage pattern is somewhat driving the expectations, right? I mean, look at what is different. You pay $30 for your DSL at home, and you don't, Google's not paying a cent to SBC when you see an ad on Google. So that is the expectation that is driving the behavior in the content ecosystem today, where people are going and telling Sprint, hey, I'm not paying SBC a penny. Why should I pay you a penny? Because you put search at the top of your deck. What does it make it? So again, does it take much more to build out a wireless network? I don't know. Is that a reason that they demand more money than SBC does? I don't know. But again, the answers are not that clearly worked out, right? So that's why we believe that the ecosystem will evolve and the marketplace will decide who gets more versus not.
We know cost of voice in terms of per minute is much higher in a wireless network than in a wired network, right? And by the time you produce a minute, it's 2.5 cents.
Right.
Costs quarter of that
All right, we'll let you guys take this offline. I think we're going to wrap this up. This could go on forever, I can tell. Thank you guys for your time, and thank you all for coming out.